I want to thank everybody for coming tonight to the revived Anarchist Forum of the Libertarian Book Club. My name is Bill Weinberg, lately of WBAI Radio, as some of you may be aware. Libertarian Book Club, we like to say, is New York City's oldest continuously active anarchist institution, founded, we believe, in 1946, although nobody from the founding enclave survives today. And after a period of inactivity, we have decided to revive this institution, and I'm very glad to see that we've got a large attendance tonight by our usual standards, which is usually the case when we have Peter Lamborn Wilson joining us. Peter is the author of many books and has been a celebrated underground intellectual of going on a generation now. Been one of the leading lights of the Libertarian Book Club Anarchist Forum, and was founder of the Moorish Orthodox Radio Crusade, the radio show, which after 25 years has now finally been removed from the airwaves of WBAI. So that's one of the reasons we've decided to revive the Anarchist Forum as a means of keeping alive a forum for anarchist ideas. When one door is closed, another one opened. It's been called Driftwork. So once again, thank you all for showing up tonight. We did have to rent the space, so at a certain point we're going to pass a hat tonight, and if everybody gave a buck or two, we'd have enough money to make ends meet, so I urge you to do that. Additionally, Libertarian Book Club started out as an actual book club for libertarian ideas. Libertarian with a lowercase l. Back before the word had sort of been subject to a hostile takeover by the free market right. We are not right-wing free market libertarians. We are old-style, left-wing anarchist libertarians. There's still a few of us left. And we continue, not as the LBC, but as affiliated institutions, to sell books as well. So please do drop by the Autonomy Media table in the back and purchase some literature. I've also got a few of my own self-published pamphlets. You can see me over at the other table as well. So we'll have time to mix it up and talk in the Q&A. And afterwards, meanwhile, I present, without further ado, Peter Lamborn Wilson.
Bill is much too modest about the money thing. If anybody wants to put $100 it may sound funny to you, but we're desperately trying to keep this organization alive. The title of my talk is, Does Anarchism Have a Future? Even more to the point is, does the Libertarian Book Club Anarchist Forum have a future? And if we don't get a little money in the bank, the answer is probably, well, who knows? I mean, you know, we're not getting any younger, the core group here. And we haven't managed to recruit any. That's another thing. If you want to help out with organizing events, talk to Bill. He's kind of in charge of that right now. So I urge you all to be as generous as you can when the hat goes around. And I still have a couple of my recent books here, which I'm selling for $20 each, to raise money for the book club. So afterwards we'll have time, or maybe in between my talk and the question and answer section, maybe we'll have time for some book buying and gouging of more money from you for a good cause. So the question is, does anarchism have a future in the 21st century? I'm surprised there's more than 2 people here to hear the answer. I didn't think there was this much interest in the subject. I was beginning to feel that that anarchism was a dead issue, and as one of our members said, you know, we should just let it slide and let anarchism evolve into whatever it's going to evolve into. And maybe we shouldn't even be using the dreaded A word, which is more misunderstood and misused in the popular media than ever before, if you may have noticed, and always in a negative sense. So if we get any press at all, it's bad press. And in fact, we don't get any press, really, because when the newspaper or the television uses the word anarchy or even anarchism, they're certainly not talking about our glorious tradition. And it is a tradition. It's at least a few hundred years old. And of course, some people would say that it's 1,000,000 years old, because in the good old days of the Stone Age, before the emergence of the state, which actually is a historical event that took place around about 4000 BC, there was a different way of organizing human society. You can't call it anarchist because there was no government for them to be against. Maybe non-authoritarian would be a good description of primordial tribal society. We assume this because, you know, when archaeologists dig in the Stone Age, they don't find kingly burials with heaps of gold and prisoners slaughtered and, you know, evidence of human sacrifice and all those things which immediately appear when the state appears. In fact, the state really in its origin is based on human sacrifice. If you don't believe me, just go read about the first dynasty in Egypt, or read Leonard Woolley's book on Ur, the city, you know, one of the very first cities in Samaria. When the state appears, a holocaust of human beings is usually considered necessary. And it goes along that way for a few, you know, centuries until they get more subtle about it. And they discover that they're killing off useful serfs, you know, this way, and it would be better just to make sure that they fall into debt and become debt peons. The Sumerians were very good at this. They loaned, well, call it money, is commodity currency, okay, like bars of silver and cows and things like that, at 33 1/3% per annum interest. This was the first bank rate from the first banks of Samaria. And of course, within a very short time, there was a tiny group of owners and rulers at the top of the ziggurat, and then the lower ranks were filled with debt peons, people who were so much in debt to the temple, which by the temple was the bank, and the bank was the temple, that they could never get out of debt until the king would die, and then they would declare Jubilee. You know about Jubilee, you've heard about it in the Bible. The Hebrews adopted this custom. They abolished all debt every 50 years. The Sumerians would abolish debt when the king died. And they had to do this or the state would collapse under the weight of accumulated debt. So you can see not much has changed in state economics in the last 6,000 years. In fact, it's really just a series of subtle refinements on the one basic thing, which is screw thy neighbor. I mean, you know, the first peons were probably the neighboring tribe, or actually one's own tribe. You know, I think that the first state was actually a coup d'etat carried out by evil black magicians and rogue warriors who decided, well, you know, screw this egalitarianship, we've had it, we want to be rulers, we want to lie back, not do any work, and have the slaves work for us. So if they didn't enslave their own people, there was always a neighboring tribe that they could enslave. Before that, it looks like, if you look at the archaeology and if you compare it with ethnographic material from the modern period, by which I mean 17th century onwards, it looks as if hunter-gatherer and early agricultural tribal society, or I should say horticultural, not agricultural, societies were non-authoritarian. That is to say that the elders had some advisory power, the grandmothers usually had advisory power. If there was an emergency, they would choose a war chief, but after the war was over, they would get rid of the war chief because they didn't want anybody to have power over them. And this went on quite happily for, well, it depends on how old you think human beings are. I like to think about 1 million years, but current orthodox science says only grants about 60,000 years for Homo sapiens. But if you include Neanderthals and Australopithecines and people like that as people, then you could say this non-authoritarian structure goes back at least 1 million years. And so we like to feel that it's natural for human beings to be anarchists. Now there is a counter argument to that, which says, look at the simians, the monkeys. They don't appear to be very non-authoritarian. There's a pecking order, you know, there's an obvious hierarchy, there's suppression of the females and children in a lot of simian societies. In that case, the mystery comes to be, how did human beings change and become non-authoritarian? And the great French anthropologist Pierre Classe always said, it's not that primitive people are stupid and ignorant. They know, humans always know that there's a possibility that other humans are going to screw them over. I mean, it's human nature, right? It's true, it is human nature to fight, to squabble, to try to get one over on your neighbors. But they had their societies organized, more or less consciously, he said, in such a way that this hierarchy would not emerge. So he said that the customs and rituals, things like primitive warfare as opposed to modern warfare, things like that, these were, the custom of not having any permanent chief, the custom that if anybody becomes rich, they had to give potlatch parties and give all their wealth away. Otherwise, people would begin to accuse them of witchcraft and other bad things. So you can see this in some remnant primitive societies even today, that the chief is not the absolute ruler. The chief is just simply someone who's willing to take responsibility for a lot of the problems of the group. And if he messes up or she messes up, they're immediately replaced. You know, if a shaman fails to cure somebody, that shaman is replaced, sometimes quite violently, if you read the ethnographic literature. So the point is, human beings know that anarchy is a privileged state. It's something that they like, something that they want. And if you stop and think about it, the reason why you accept the state today is fear and terror and debt. You accept it because you're in debt, so you have to work for the man. You accept it because you're afraid of terrorism and foreign countries and other races and other types of people who might do bad things to you. And by the way, they're afraid of you for the very same reasons. And their states like to pump that up, you know. And states thrive on this kind of thing. I had an old anarchist friend who used to call the state the territorial gangsters. His idea was that the states are founded essentially by mafiosi. Going back to the Sumerian and Egyptian antiquity, these were not normal people who founded the state. They were gangsters, thugs. And basically it's a protection racket. You pay us tax, not tribute, tax, and we won't kill you. Or we won't take all your wheat. We'll only take half your wheat. So that should be a great deal, right? You should be thankful, because meanwhile we're protecting you from bad stuff that might happen to you. We're protecting you from your neighbors who have all the same bad ideas that we do, and so forth and so on. So this is the way the state perpetuates itself. And it's a very recent story. You know, when you get into history and prehistory, you begin to see that the history of the state is a fly speck compared to the long duration of the human story that was essentially non-authoritarian. I won't say that there weren't slips, that there weren't slip-ups. I won't claim that there was never an ancient tribe of Australopithecines that didn't fall prey to some clever gangster. We don't know. There's certainly no archaeological evidence of it. Whereas there is immediately, when the state appears, immediately there's archaeological evidence. You can't mistake it. It's so clear. Before, you had group burials with very poor grave goods that seem to be shared amongst all the skeletons, if you like. And afterwards, you have the king, buried in lonely splendor, surrounded by the most valuable metal things that money could buy, because now we're in the age of metal. I'm afraid that has a lot to do with it. You know, metallurgy is what actually facilitated this takeover. Weapons, new weapon technology. That and the shift over from what I call the hunting-gathering horticultural society, which means you hunt a little, you gather a little, you plant a little garden, you know, beans and corn, maybe some tobacco, maybe some drugs to get high on, and that's it, you know. You don't plow the earth. You don't have plantations that take slave labor, essentially, to run. That's agriculture. Now the slaves have been replaced by machines, but the agriculture, the society around the agriculture is still the same. So when that disappears, when the hunting-gathering horticultural society disappears, you get irrigation, you get deep plowing, you get metallurgy, you get modern warfare, which means that tribute is taken and the enemy is considered to be permanently beaten, as opposed to primitive warfare where you steal a few cows, a few women, you know, and then it's back to the situation as it was before. And by the way, why did they steal women? Because they understood that hunting and gathering takes up a lot of land. You need, scientists say you need about 50 square miles to support a band of 50 hunters. If you add a little gardening, you could squeeze it in a little. But essentially, these societies needed a lot of elbow room. And so they practiced infanticide, abortion, and birth control, the technology which they knew very well. But sometimes that would get out of hand. You would have a famine or a disease on top of that. The tribe would be depleted, and it needed more people. So they would go out and capture more people and adopt them. They would either kill them or adopt them. The American Indians were still doing this when the white people arrived, and they couldn't understand this new way of waging war, where, you know, if we beat you, you stay beaten, and now you have to obey us. That was not at all their idea of war. For example, they would count coup. You know, you remember this, you've probably seen this in movies. It's quite true. In Indian warfare, there was a special magic stick called a coup stick. And if I ride up to you and touch you with the coup stick, you have to get out of the fight. It's like a game, right? I don't have to kill you. I just have to show that I'm braver than you. So that's what I mean by primitive warfare. And that is an institution which actually dissipates the power of any potential state from ever taking place. That was Pierre Clastres' idea, C-L-A-S-T-R-E-S, Clastres. Great, brilliant French anthropologist who died tragically young. Do we still have the archaeology of violence?
Still some copies of it, but
Yeah.
not tonight.
You didn't bring it tonight. Well, we published a very important book by him, and his other famous book is called Society Against the State, right?
Yep.
Yeah. That's a classic. I really strongly recommend that to everybody's attention. Also, the book with the unfortunate title, Man the Hunter. It really should have been, you know, And Woman the Gatherer, or something like that. But that came out in 1968, before such feminist niceties were widespread. And that was edited by Marshall Sahlins, S-A-H-L-I-N-S. And that was the book, he coined the phrase, the original leisure society, to describe the hunters, because he found that even in the modern world, where the hunting societies had been pushed out to the very edge of livable space, in other words, civilization got all the good ground, And the hunters and gatherers were pushed out into, you know, Alaska and Siberia, the Kalahari, places like that. And when he studied them, he found that they tended to work on the average 4.2 hours a day to earn their living, whereas the primitive agriculturalists, the peasants, were working 14 hours a day. He found that the hunters had over an average of 200 different things to eat, which they knew about. It was some season by season. It wasn't food that they all had all the time, but they had a larder, as he put it, of 200 items. The primitive agriculturalists had a larder of 20 items. So if there was any disease wiped out one of their foodstuffs, it was very bad for them. And it's agriculture which creates real starvation, real famine. Before that, sure, hunters can run on a bad period and they could all die of hunger, but that's not the same thing quite as starvation, as hunger and starvation and famine. Those are generally speaking, those are economic realities, not natural realities, as any economic historian will tell you. I mean, you think about some of the famines you know, like the Irish famine in 1848, and you'll realize that the countries around Ireland had plenty to eat. In fact, Ireland had plenty to eat, but it was shipping it all to England because the English owned it, and they were taking the beef, the pigs, the wheat, and they left the potatoes for the Irish, and the potatoes were screwed. They were all dead. So the Irish had a famine, but was it a natural famine? No, I'd say it was a politico-economic famine. So that's the story about the hunters and gatherers. And then, if you go through history, you'll see that the resistance against this, the Moloch, the Mammon, the Moloch state, you know, what Allen Ginsberg called Moloch, the state that eats its children. These were the gods of the Babylonians. And you'll never find a period of human history where there isn't some resistance, and usually an organized resistance. In the old days, by which I mean the 19th century and the early 20th century, historians didn't give human beings credit for this ability to resist oppression and power. They just believed that either that the peasants were happy or else that they were beaten once and for all and could never rise up again until, you know, sometime in the 19th century when things began to change again, when you began to have ideological socialism being brought in by people like Bakunin and Marx. And then, from the capitalist point of view, things were spoiled. Darn. It wasn't such smooth sailing anymore because now there was historical resistance which came above the level of written history. Before that, you have to go below the level of written history to find the resistance. But it's there if you look for it. It's always there. I like to think of it as the oldest secret society in the world, in a way. I mean, I'm not claiming that there's an actual handing down of this society from generation to generation. This is not a conspiracy theory. But there is always some kind of a secret society of resistance. Even in the most authoritarian, brutal, royalistic, imperial periods of human history, there will be bandits. If nothing else, there'll be bandits. And when you hear the word bandit, you should cock your ears, because what you're really hearing about is a kind of resistance against the state and its evil economics. So, as I say, in the 19th century, starting with people like some Russians like Herzen and Bakunin and Kropotkin, some Germans like Marx, and a lot of Jews like Emma Goldman and Alexander Berkman from that part of the world, being smart and intellectual as they were. They tended to gravitate towards these, what appeared to be, even to them at the time, because they didn't have the same advantage of archaeology and anthropology that we do. They didn't have the good books to read that we have. So it seemed quite a new idea to them. Although I will say that Marx notably studied the American Indians and based a lot of his thinking on what he learned about American Indian societies. So even Marxism has roots in what you might think of as primitive non-authoritarian society. And of course, famously, Marx expected the state to wither. He was not himself really, in his heart of hearts, he was not an authoritarian. If you've read the philosophical manuscripts of what is it, 1844, right, thank you. You'll see that there was a young Marx, a happier Marx, a more optimistic and loving Marx, who worried about alienation and things like that. And later on, out of a desire, first of all, because he had a fight with Proudhon, and then a big fight with Bakunin, and he broke with the anarchists, so it was necessary for him to make a clear distinction between communism and anarchism. But in the beginning, there was very little distinction. It was all a kind of it was a general field of resistance against the state and on behalf of the commons. And so you had hybrids like anarcho-communism and anarcho-syndicalism that were between the world of socialism and the world of anarchism, per se. And these seem like exciting new ideas in the 19th century. And for a while, it almost seemed as if they had a chance. I like to think about 1911. 1911 is one of my favorite years. It's like the last nice year before the 20th century really gets started. And after that, it's downhill all the way. In 1911, anarchism was a very optimistic creed indeed. You'd be amazed. You'd probably laugh if you saw how naive and unsophisticatedly optimistic the anarchists of that period were. They thought a few bombs here and there, the state will crumble. Well, it turned out that the state had a lot more juice in it than they knew, and essentially, in order to put an end to socialism and to the whole modern radical project that came into being, let's say, between 1860 and 1912, they organized a century of world war. And that disciplined the masses again, encourager les autres, as the French say. Everyone realized that first of all, that anarchism was out, and that communism itself was turning into an authoritarian, dictatorial superstate, and word began to filter out of the Soviet Union until finally even the most optimistic socialists began to become quite depressed and pessimistic about the future of socialism. Culminating, as you know, in 1989, when history came to an end, and now we have capitalism forever. It's the triumph of capitalism. And there's no more socialism. The peons, the peasants have been beaten at last, crushed down by all these debt, especially by debt crises. And that's it, that's the end. From now on, you can just sort of choose your flavor of capitalism, and you better be damn happy with it, because you're not getting anything else, they say. So the whole question that I'm bringing up tonight here is really very vexed and difficult and even kind of awful question when I'm asking, does anarchism have a future? Now, some of my old friends here know that I like to say that I just can't bring myself to be an optimist. The best I can do is anti-pessimism. But you know, I have to say, the more I began thinking about what I was going to talk about tonight, the more I realized that I'm in a dangerously kind of, how can I put it, dangerously cautiously optimistic mood. It's hard to even say that. You know, you want to be a cynic. You want to be a pessimist because you feel that only pessimists are the only ones whose predictions come true. But you know, I just can't help feeling that we're due for a change. Why do I think that? First of all, because too late capitalism is making such a god-awful mess of itself. This glorious triumph of capitalism within a couple of decades led to a crisis that has put even the middle class of America down at the peasant level of permanent debt, and not to mention the institutions, the banks, the insurance companies and so forth, all based on a kind of vast universal debt, not on wealth, not on leisure. The leisure society is all those, you remember, if you grew up in the 50s, you must remember all those wonderful predictions about the future. Everybody was going to have their own personal jetpack, you know, and fly around between tall skyscrapers, and they'd have robots to wait on them in their house. Anybody here got a robot made? I don't think so. Okay. And you're not going to get one either. Until they make them as cheap as, you know, handheld computers, and then everybody will get one, but they won't work very well. they'll break, and they'll have to be replaced by next year's model. And this is the way capitalism works. They want everyone must have all the gadgets themselves personally. You can't share. That's just not capitalism. So every adult in America now has an automobile. This is a fact. There's one automobile for every adult in America. And God knows how many computers there are for every human being in America, and how many cell phones. And the fact is, you have to have these things. You know, it's a luxury not to have these things. And if you don't have them, it means basically that you're not working for a living. Because if you're working for a living, you have to have them. First of all, you're not going to have the same job you have now 2 years from now. We all know that, right? That's called precarity. Now, the Europeans call that precarity. It means that your job is precarious. And this is another way of disciplining the marks, the suckers, is to make sure that no one is secure in their work. So, so basically, we're facing a future of economic uncertainty and debt, and a lot of people in this room are probably basically freelance. That is to say, they're self-employed, and that means that, let's say you're a magazine writer, which I tried to be at one point. If you don't have a cell phone, how are you going to get the job? You know, they're going to call somebody else who will respond immediately instead of the next day, because they want efficiency. They want to be efficient. Or email. You know, if you don't have email, you can't even stay in touch with your own boss, right? So everyone must have every gadget, and there's no sharing is allowed. It doesn't work that way. You can't share a personal computer. It was meant to be personal. So this is what the future looks like if you look at it from the capitalist perspective. But, you know, let me put it this way. One of the things I do is I study Islamic mysticism and Islamic culture. I've done that for many years. And I'm as surprised as everybody else by the Arab Spring. I did not expect it. And I think it's wonderful. It's not the revolution, and it might even fail.